CNFers, the frontrunner strides into fall, into October. The best month of the year. I will be in Ketchum, Idaho. I am on the road right now to Idaho. I'm going to be signing and selling books with my own two hands at the Legends Never Die Ultra Marathon. Friday, October 3rd, I'll be at Sturt Events from 5 to 6, hawking books. And Saturday, October 4th, hawking books for the race. Then I will be at Fleet Feet Meridian in Boise, Idaho on Monday, October 6th, where I'll be joined by Steve Prefontaine's high school distance coach, Phil Persian. And on Tuesday, October 7th, I'm at Old Speak in Boise in conversation with my good pal, Kim H. Cross. We're taking Idaho by storm. Stay plugged into my newsletters in BrendanO'Mara.com. Hey, secondarily on Instagram at Creative Nonfiction Podcast or on Bluesky, BrendanO'Mara.bsky.social. Is that it? Call for submissions. We got two. We got two more. The audio magazine is back. Codes is the theme. The Mandalorian and his kind live by a simple code, always punctuated by saying, "This is the way." What codes do you live by? What codes were you at one time or another told to live by? Has a code led you down the wrong path or up the right one? I don't know. Essays should be no longer than 2,000 words, a 15-minute read. Bear in mind that in the end, these are audio essays. Write accordingly. Email submissions with codes. And you got to say it like that. In the subject line to creativenonfictionpodcast@gmail.com. Previously unpublished work, please. Deadline is October 31st, so you got like 28 days. Get cracking. There is cash on the line from the O'Mara grant, so send me your best, fully formed pieces, and consider becoming a patron to help put money in the coffers that helps put money in the pockets of writers, because we need that burrito money.
You know, people are not as one-dimensional as their yard signs.
Oh, hey, CNFers, it's the Creative Non-Fiction Podcast, and it's the Atavistian time of the month, so consider heading to magazine.atavist.com to subscribe. I did. I don't get handouts or kickbacks. Yeah, as I said at the top of the show, I'm en route to Idaho at this very moment. Got 2 things in Ketchum, 2 things in Boise. I have too many books. I'm so screwed. Okay, this is the show where if I just shut the fuck up, talk to tellers of true tales about the true tales they tell. Today we have Masha Hamilton. She's a journalist, a novelist, a fan of the show, a fan of Pitch Club. You'll want to visit MashaHamilton.com to learn more about her wide-ranging career covering the world. She's the author of 5 novels and trying to sell her 6th. She was at one point the director of communications and public diplomacy at the U.S. Embassy in Kabul. Her story for The Atavist is about her driving the entire length of I-95 from Miami to Maine with her photographer son Cheney and stopping at just about every rest stop along the way to speak with strangers about how they feel about our country. It's a very Travels with Charlie kind of thing. And the deck of the piece is conversations and revelations about an ailing nation along Interstate 95. And man, those Atavist editors can write the hell out of a deck. Masha was really a joy to talk to, but now wait a second. Show notes to this episode and more at BrendanO'Mara.com. Hey. There you can peruse for hot blogs, tasteful nudes, and sign up for my 2 very important newsletters, the flagship Rage Against the Algorithm and Pitch Club. Issue 5 with Justin Heckard just went up. It's a bit of a curveball. Go check it out. I would love for Pitch Club to just keep catching fire, man. Share it with your friends. Share it with your enemies. Let's keep doing it. Make book pitches. There'll probably be agent pitches, radio pitches, doc film pitches. Pitches to sources lobbying your case that you should write about them. Maybe my Prefontaine book proposal, I'll do that. I'll do it up. Maybe my next book proposal, if and when it sells. Pitch Club will never cost a dime. I will never paywall something this rich. All I ask is for your permission, because platform is currency. Both are first of the month, no spam. So far as I can tell, you can't beat them. Also, if you care to support the podcast with a few dollar bills, visit patreon.com/CNFpod. There are some rad perks but most are happy to just throw a few bucks into my guitar case. Got 2 new patrons to shout out, and I'm going to, if I pronounce this wrong, I am sorry, but I'm going to do my best. Thank you very much for Suwan Law and Diane Castro. Awesome stuff. Really cool to see a couple come on board. I plan on doing a Zoom hangout, a happy half hour in the next couple of weeks after I'm back from Idaho for patrons. I tried doing the AMA thing, like I said. I think some of you know, and it was weird and awkward. But I think if I did a virtual thing just for like a half an hour and we just hang out and maybe I'll bring an icebreaker. Maybe I'll bring the hammer. Guess who's back? Seyward Darby. Do your best Kermit the Frog dance, 'cause she's back, baby. Very nice to hear her. And this piece challenged Seyward in ways that I didn't really see coming. Meaning she didn't share Masha's optimism. Seyward, for lack of a better word, disagreed with it. So there was an interesting tension she brought to the edit. So we're going to hear from her right now. Cue up the montage. Huh.
People who do this for fame are foolish.
It's so true. I actually would not mind just growing people's flowers for them.
Go get a gelato and chill out. And I was like, I can't.
This is going to have to interest somebody somewhere other than me.
About what struck you about this piece, which is very, very personal, narrative driven.
This was kind of an unusual one, as you say, I think thematically, but structurally as well. And it came in, she had more or less drafted it already, and it felt very sort of raw and timely because she had just been on this road trip a few weeks prior. This was all very fresh. And it's funny because I read the draft and I sent it to Jonah and I was like, am I crazy or is there something here? Because it did, it was obviously not one of our deeply reported narratives, but I found it so compelling, the basic concept of it, that you would drive the length of I-95. And I should take a little detour here to say that, I grew up in North Carolina. My mom's family was in South Carolina. My dad's family was in Georgia and Florida. I spent a lot of time on I-95 in my childhood. And then as an adult, I lived in DC, I lived in New York. So again, I-95 just such a fixture of my existence. And so I think there was also some element of just feeling like I know this place and I know the experience of going to these rest stops. But I really liked the concept of driving the length of, one of America's best known, most used highways, also the deadliest highway in the country, and talking to people about where we are in this political moment. And the fact that, there were photographs that already went along with it because her son Cheney had been, part of the trip. I don't know, it felt like it has that arc that we look for, start to finish, literally southern terminus to northern terminus. And then one of the things Masha and I worked on in the editing process was instead of giving away what the revelations and sort of conclusions were at the beginning, sort of working up to them in the narrative, which is a more atavistic approach. I have lots of feelings about this piece, and which I'm happy to get into. But it was a very, very interesting editing process for me, personally.
Yeah, well, let's pull on that thread. Why was this such a personal editing process for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. The best way I can put it, to summarize it, is that I found myself just not agreeing with it. And by that I mean spoiler alert, comes to find hope in the course of this journey. And I am so deeply pessimistic about the future of this country. And so, working on something that is making its case, and I think some people will, very much buy the case and agree. But me personally, here I was grumble as I'm reading it, being like, we're doomed. We're headed for, an irreparable fracture in this country. And I actually really appreciated working on something like that, right? Because, I mean, first of all, we don't really work on, the Atavist doesn't run a lot of stories that have sort of, more of a take or an opinion built in, at least not to this extent. And, as an editor, I think it's important to occasionally work on something that you find, again, disagree makes it seem like I'm in argument with it. That's not what it is. It's just, I like emotionally, I'm not in the same place, but also I haven't driven the length of I-95 recently and talked to dozens, maybe hundreds of strangers. So really, what the hell do I know at all?
It sounds like it really challenged you in a way.
Yeah, in a way, because I wanted to, obviously I didn't want to push, her takeaways were her takeaways. She had gone on this trip. This was her experience. And I can't change that. Certainly I posed questions about, does this feel Pollyanna-ish at times? Like, do you, and she always had answers to that. Because again, she'd had this experience and this was her take. And I will also say that we assigned this before Charlie Kirk was killed. And I was actually in the process of editing the story when he was killed. And I think that, and Masha and I have talked about this after the fact, like, I think that only sort of pulled me further in the direction of feeling pessimistic, because instantly, and this is just because of like my own experience covering the far right in the United States and whatnot, as soon as he was killed, I was like, things are about to get really, really, really bad. Regardless of, the reasons that this happened, who's responsible for it, doesn't matter. It's going to get so, so, so bad. And it has. And there's actually a little bit of material right at the end of the piece that Masha and I added in the wake of his killing. And it's not overt. Like, we don't mention Charlie Kirk. We don't mention, his death. But we talk about, or she talks about, how public life spills into private life. And sometimes there's violence there. And then she had this really lovely phrase that she actually just used in conversation. It wasn't something that she was writing in. And then I included it about, can we, hopefully, like, our grief can be guardrails, as opposed to, something that takes away all our sort of inhibitions and, desire to be a community. Maybe that can actually help us build like the reinforcements that we need around ourselves. So yeah, this is all to say, like, I think Masha really challenged me to come out of my pessimistic hole, and engage with, a more, I don't even want to say optimistic, because I do think she ends on such a lovely note of, how she talks about belonging as choice. We don't belong by right. We don't belong, I mean, to a certain extent, I guess we belong by privilege, but also we really do belong by choice. Do we want to belong in a place? What does that look like? And so, she talks about making the choice to belong day after day. And that's not everything's fine. What does she say? I think I, belong here for now. And so, I think that there is definitely tension there, about what the future might hold. But, yeah, this is all to say, I really appreciated working on something that, like, again, I keep thinking that I disagree with, and that feels almost too strong. But that I don't know. I've not had her experience, and I don't know. Maybe I will. Maybe something will happen to give me more hope in the future, for the future rather.
Right. Well, and in talking with Masha, she was saying there was a reluctance on her part to include a lot of her and her son Cheney's story in it. She's like, I just want to be the pipe, and you push back. You're like, well, the pipe is part of the story. And so talk a little bit about how you coached her and encouraged her to include, her and her son's relationship as a major thread to this and connective tissue for the piece.
Right. Well, I think that, first of all, it's just interesting. Like, this is a mother and son who have collaborated creatively before, on a, word and photograph project. And in this case, hey mom, or I guess she said to Cheney, like, hey Cheney, why don't we live in the back of your Subaru for almost 3 weeks, just the two of us, and go talk to like dozens of strangers? Like, that's, I can't, I love my mother. She might even be listening to this. I can't imagine. Right. And so I think like the very, like from go, just like the sort of reality of their relationship, the texture of their relationship, I was like, that's going to be interesting to people. And then on top of that, the fact that this was the first time that they had really spent meaningful time together since she, felt betrayed more or less by the secret that he had been keeping from her. And I think that what I really liked was I liked how the two threads reflected each other, right? Like her relationship with her son and her relationship with her country. Like there's something parallel going on there about something that you love and you cherish, but that challenges you, that you feel because of decisions made that you were not a part of or that you disagreed with, kind of creating a rift. And how do you find your way back? And I thought that there was, without being very heavy-handed, because it's not a heavy-handed piece at all, like I think that those two things really sing together if you are reading closely. So I encouraged her to, we obviously didn't get into tremendous detail, but I had her check with Cheney, hey, you cool putting in, a little bit more about, what happened between the two of them. And he was cool with it. Yeah, I think it adds such an interesting layer that's sort of on its face interesting, right? Somebody keeps a secret that they've been married all this time from their parent, who they're otherwise so close to that they go sleep in the back of cars and do creative projects together.
Yeah.
Sort of that is interesting in and of itself. But then what really made it work was the fact that there was an interplay with sort of what their project was on the road. So yeah, and she was game and he was game. And so it worked out.
If there was something else you had to put your finger on structurally or what else, what were other challenges for you on your side of the table to bring this piece to light?
Yeah, well, I was going to say this was a very smooth process, other than, again, sort of it was like the emotional engagement for me. But the actual, logistical process working with Masha and Cheney, like a total dream. I think that one of the other things that really stood out to me in the pitch or the draft was that along the way there are these little surprises, or not even little, but just like surprises that she doesn't dwell on, but that every time just add a new layer of depth. So like by way of example, when she mentions that her husband died of early onset Alzheimer's, she doesn't dwell on it, but it allows, first you're just like, oh wow, you've had this whole experience. And that was a project that Cheney, I guess, did a project. They did a project together. He did one for the New York Times, and they did a project together related to early onset Alzheimer's. But just immediately I was like, oh, this adds a layer to your character, if you will, that, kind of comes, I want to say like 2/3 of the way through the piece or something, and just immediately made her more, sort of compelling to me. The other examples are, she's a journalist, clearly she's a novelist, and then there's this detour to Afghanistan because she worked at the U.S. Embassy there and experienced like really terrible tragedy. In some ways too, like that was complexifying not only to her character, but like to the point of view of the piece, because this is the person who has worked on behalf of the United States government, right? And clearly has very conflicted feelings about its place in the work that it does in the world or fails to do in the world, or the bad work that it does in the world.
Yeah.
And so I think there were just so many things. This was not just, hey, I decided to drive I-95 and talk to people, which is like interesting, great. I said, that's a really good premise, but it was who's doing it and how is she sort of along the way revealing pieces of her experience that actually just by the end you're like, oh wow, this is even richer than I kind of imagined it might be. And so figuring out where to put those things in the piece and how, from a sort of cadence standpoint, and then whether to go into detail or not. And when she brings up her husband, obviously she does it in the context of meeting another woman whose husband had died of Alzheimer's, but also uses it as a way to sort of segue to talking about memory in a really beautiful way that forms a good portion of the piece. So yeah, I think there were just so many things that for a piece that I think is relatively quiet by Atavist standards, there are some kind of oh wow moments that you just don't quite see coming, and I don't mean that from a plot standpoint so much as a character development standpoint.
Yeah, in terms of how quiet it is, it really speaks to how everyone is carrying so much.
Yeah, and I think the willingness to share what they're carrying is really beautiful. My mind in thinking about those moments of intimacy and empathy, my mind always goes to, okay, but if we were suddenly in like all out war, would that person protect, protect me, right? Like despite our differences. And again, almost sort of in the process of editing this piece, I had to be like, that's not the thought exercise, actually. Like, this is doing something else and sort of asking you. And she says this, right? She's like, maybe, the real sort of like radical act is to just be present with each other, to not, venture into worst case scenario thinking or, assumptions, certainly. But no, I think you're absolutely right. Like, and I think she does such a nice job of, I would have to go through and count, like, how many people does she describe or quote in this piece? But you really do feel like every single person, you get just that enough detail to understand, oh yes, they're carrying something. Whether that's something related to, I'm also so sorry, I don't know if you can hear my child yelling in the background.
Oh, no.
But he's okay, great. Well, sorry to your listeners if they hear a shriek. He's excited about his snack, whatever it is.
Oh, wow. And who wouldn't be?
Who wouldn't be? It's probably pasta. And I mean, who doesn't love pasta? Anyway, like, I think it's a real like study in the economy of descriptive writing, right? I mean, does she describe anyone physically? If she does, it's not standing out to me, right? Like, yeah. She describes people through experience. And I think that's a really like lovely way of doing things. And of course, Cheney's photos obviously, show people physically, but yeah, I don't know. There's just something deeply empathic about the story and about the approach to description and sort of presentation.
Oh, nice. Well, Seyward, it's always a pleasure. I'm so glad we're in conversation again. It's been so long, and I'm glad you're back in the rotation to talk about your side of the table of these brilliant stories that you bring to publication. So just thanks for carving out time to do this, and we'll kick it over to Masha now.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, now it's time for Masha Hamilton. This piece really illustrates the things we carry. Title of the piece, let's see, let me pull it up on the internet. I've gone to look for America. And yes, like I said, it really illustrates the things that we're carrying, how everyone's carrying something. That politics isn't necessarily this monolith. It really gets into the empathy of talking one-on-one. And Masha and I, we talk a lot about novels as complementary to her nonfiction, covering societies in change, healing through story, how this was a therapy session of sorts, accelerated intimacy, endings, middles, finding the meaning, writing you rearrange your calendar for, and belonging as practice. Going to have a parting shot on my time at the Florence Book Festival and Weird Writer Side-Eye. But for now, let's give it up for Masha Hamilton. Ruth. You've written a lot of novels, and and you're also a journalist. Your toys in different sandboxes. And in what way do they inform each other and help each other out and complement each other?
I was a journalist for a long time before. I always wanted to write a novel, but was a journalist a long time before I wrote that first novel. And I felt that novel writing allowed me to go very interior and understand myself in certain ways. And also, I had covered conflict. I'd seen some difficult things, and I had closed off a certain amount of my feelings in order to deal with whatever I was seeing, because I strongly believe the person to whom this is happening to is the most important person. And if I get upset, well, that is really beside the point. So I kind of closed off my own emotions. And when I wrote that first novel, I really realized that I had to reopen up access to those emotions. I think that was important and useful for me. I understand why I did that as a young journalist often in conflict zones, but I think it's not helpful for the rest of your life, because first of all, you can't say this is going to happen to me only between 8 and 5, or once you start closing that off and you start doing it, you find that or at least I did, that it was closed off a lot in other areas. And that's not what I wanted. Novel writing helped with that. It opened that up. And I do love writing novels. I have, as you said, 5 published, and a 6th is with my agent, fingers crossed. But I also really love nonfiction a lot, and absolutely loved doing this piece and working with Seyward, which was amazing. So yeah.
Yeah. Do you find that writing fiction helps bring a different kind of prism to your nonfiction, that your nonfiction has become almost more novelistic as a result of that experience with fiction?
I think so. I'm also taking the freedom to do that. When I started as a journalist, I worked for the Associated Press and then for the Los Angeles Times. And the LA Times allowed a certain amount of that leeway, but the AP was pretty much, there was not a lot of room for, even in feature writing, there were kind of rules that you had to follow. In novel writing, the only rule you have to follow is, can you make the reader care and believe on page 1? And then can you do it again on page 2? And then can you do it again on page 3, and so on? And that's, you're trying to write to a truth in novel writing. And then you are writing to only the verifiable truth more strictly in nonfiction. So they use the same toolbox, but for me, they complement each other. And I found out that I don't think I want to do just one or just the other. I like the way that they inform each other.
Yeah, that's a really great way of framing it. Anytime that I've just noodled with fiction, it's kind of like if your car is out of alignment and it's like you let go of the wheel and it just like keeps pulling you to a different direction. You're like, now get back on the road here. I feel like if I noodle with fiction, like the car wants to go back to the nonfiction. Like, maybe you can report this out and make it true, like make it verifiably true, which is more where my taste lies. But I greatly enjoy and respect fiction as well. So it's like, I almost have to keep the wheel pulled in that direction. Otherwise, I just drift back to journalism.
Well, I do think the one thing about novel writing and fiction is there are many ways in which all of us feel alone, because there are things that we think and feel that we don't talk to other people about, because why would we? And in what conversation would it possibly come up? And what would you? And sometimes when you're reading a piece of fiction, you see that moment reflected, because the writer can get even closer than you can in movies. They can get all the way in and show you something. And you can think, oh my gosh, that's, and I didn't know that anybody else had those moments when they felt that way or whatever. And so I feel like that's an amazing gift. And you can do that through nonfiction. You can do it through movies in a way, but fiction writing allows you to get very, very close to the internals workings of your characters, and to reflect hopefully something true back to the readers.
Yeah, and given that you do both, what's the practice by which you approach your days when you're in the throes of a creative project, but maybe you've got irons and other fires too?
Yeah, I do have a couple irons, and it's it can be very tough. It's really a day by day kind of thing, and you sort of balance it out. Like, okay, this week I really need to finish this draft of the novel, because my agent has asked for changes in the last 4 chapters, and I really need to get them done and get it to her by this date. So I'm not really going to look at anything else. I know it's there, but I'm just not going to do it. And then the next time, do you kind of do it the same way? I mean, because you're doing a podcast and writing at the same time. I mean, how do you balance it?
Yeah, as long as I've done the podcast, I haven't had a very strict workflow, though I'm trying to incorporate one where that way I don't get too overwhelmed by the glut of the edit and just all the reading and some of that cursory research, so I'm a bit familiar with the person sitting across from me. Yeah, so right now of late I've been like, Monday will typically be an edit. Like, I'll edit and get the transcript into Otter, and then Tuesday I used to clean up the whole transcript. But nowadays, like in the edit, I just write down a few keywords of like my 5 favorite quotes, and I go into that transcript and then clean up just those quotes I really want to pull out for the show notes. And then Wednesday, I'll start drawing up the show notes and let's see, and get it sort of up and scheduled. And then on Thursday, some of the social assets, get all the show notes really buttoned up. And then on Friday, it publishes, and I send out stuff to social media and the guests, too, so they can share it as well. So breaking it up into those pieces really helps. And then so around that, too, if I'm working, like right now I'm working on another book proposal, so trying to thread that in, research for other guests. Yeah, it's a bit haphazard, but the more order I can try to corral these things with, it's the more my mind can get my head around it, because then it just starts anew the next week, and then trying to work through the backlog of interviews. Yeah, it's a bit all over the place.
No, but you have a lot more order than I do. I'm not even quite that ordered. As I say, I really just say like, oh my gosh, these next 3 days really have to be about this, whatever it is, and that's what I do.
Yeah, would you say that maybe a superpower you might have is like when you need to focus, like you can focus for that amount of time?
I would say I'm pretty good at focusing. When my 3 kids were little, I used to work in a little teeny room right off the kitchen, and they kind of knew when I was working really hard on something, because they would come in and say, "Hey, Mom, can we like have donuts for dinner?" And I would go like, "Mm-hmm, mm-hmm," and they go, "Oh, great, and we can stay up till 11, right?" Mm-hmm. So I was very focused on the work, and I would also say to my husband sometimes when I would come out, "When you see me outside of that little room, I'm still writing. I still don't want to talk. I still don't want to, I'm still in the zone. I don't want to discuss anything really. I'm just coming out to get a drink of water or put a load of clothes in the laundry and let my head kind of clear, but I'm still working."
Oh yeah, that's a really great point to underscore, that oftentimes that even the writing is still going on, the machinery is still working, even when you're not actually pecking out words at the keyboard.
100%, 100%.
The story that you have with the Atavist, it's so different from what the Atavist has run over the last few years that I've had this partnership with them. It's such an illuminating piece, and I wonder just how you arrived at this, Travels with Charlie kind of meditation up and down I-95.
I feel that America's in an inflection point, and people are carrying extraordinary change in their pockets, change that's affecting them and that they're trying to deal with. And, I've covered societies in change before, Moscow during the collapse of communism, the Middle East during the 2 intifadas in the West Bank and Gaza, and, Afghanistan from 2003 or so on. And so I've seen this, and I really began to feel wherever we're headed is going to look different. Even 10 years from now, we're just changing so dramatically, and I want to capture that. And I actually was with 3 friends of mine when I said, I think I want to do something going down I-95 and talking to people. And I reached out to my son, Cheney, who's a photographer, and we began to talk about it. He said, let's do rest stops. And I said, that's perfect, because people are traveling. We're saying the country is in motion. And I want to find out what's out there. I want to find out if what I see on social media, what I read in the headlines really reflects what I'm going to find on the ground. And that was my driving question when we set out on the trip.
Mm. So how do you approach people at the rest areas?
Yeah, that was the most exhausting part, as you can imagine, because I'm coming up to people as they're on their way to the bathroom, or to get a cup of coffee. And I pretty much am saying the same thing over and over. Hi, my name is Masha. I'm traveling with my son, Cheney, from Miami to Maine. We're talking to travelers along the way at every rest stop that we possibly can along I-95 about where they're going and where they think the country is. Would you be willing to talk for a minute or two with me about this? And a lot of people said, yes, but not everybody. Then I would say, I'm recording this. Some of it will be on a podcast. We may write something later on, and then we would just sort of go from there. And I was surprised by how many people said yes. And although I wanted to find out where they believed America was going, I began to feel I really needed to follow the conversation where it took me, which meant that you really had to pay sharp attention to where they seemed to want to go and to try to establish some kind of trust with them. Hey, I'm not coming here with a viewpoint. I'm not going to tell you because you say this, you suck or you don't suck or whatever. I'm going to just really, I want to hear whatever you want to talk about. Prior road trips, your road trips you remember from being a child, your favorite road trip. Do you see a lot of car crashes when you're traveling on I-95? I mean, just anywhere the conversation wanted to go, I wanted to be able to go with it. So it was exhausting. And there were absolutely days when, I remember one day when Cheney was driving and said, should we do one more stop? And I'm like, no, like I am done. I am effing done. I can't, this is because it was just, it's tiring. That was a very tiring part of it. But a lot of people were willing to talk, for a little bit. And that was something to see.
As you're going up and down I-95, about how many people are you talking to maybe on a daily basis?
Well, in all, I think that I talked to about 250 people, which is a lot of people. Yeah. Immigrants, retirees, truckers, tourists, military families, students, the unhoused, people who live nearby and were just taking a short jaunt across town, people on sidecars, people on motorcycles, all of it. Yes, it was a lot of people to talk to. I did record them and they went on a podcast called American Miles, or some of them did. I got some people I would just say, do you sing to yourself when you're driving? What do you sing? Can you sing it for me? Would it be okay if I record you singing that, and get them to sing for me, whatever they sing on the road or whatever. And it would just really depend, on the situation. Of course, as I say, there were people who said no, but I was surprised how many people said yes.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? I think a lot of journalists, especially those that might be a bit more shy and introverted, of which I classify myself as that, there's a lot of anxiety around cold calling and approaching people. The terror that we sort of kick up in our heads is almost never manifest when we actually just make that call and talk to those person. Very rarely do I leave the call being like, oh, that was a nightmare. Like usually I'm like, oh, that was quite nice. And was that more or less your experience?
More or less, yes. I think some people thought, is this woman panhandling? Who is this woman approaching me at a rest stop? But yeah. A while ago, a long time ago, I founded the Afghan Women's Writing Project. We put on a website the stories that women wrote, their first names only, because it was, the Taliban it was a different period when the Taliban wasn't in power, but the Taliban was still your uncle or your cousin, and you had to be somewhat careful. And I really began to feel from that people want to tell you their stories, and that there can be almost a healing in somebody telling you their story out loud for themselves. I mean, they see their story themselves. They do what they want to do. With these women, for example, you would never tell them what you think. They would tell you about sometimes horrible things, and you want to say, get out of that house, but you wouldn't, because you're not there in Afghanistan. What are you going to do? Say, come live in my spare room? No. So you don't say anything. And they, over time, they reach their own decisions about what was best for them and right to do. And I think that was through process of telling their own stories. So I'm torn between, I'm going to bug somebody by walking up to them, at a rest stop at I-95 when they're tired and they just really want to stretch. And the idea that, telling your own story is liberating in certain ways and healing potentially,
Yeah. Was it through your experience, did you, like the fact that people are often so willing to tell their stories, I think part of that starts to illustrate how greatly lonely a lot of people are, and that they just want someone to listen to them, and few people are willing to do that. Maybe that was your experience too, as you were just involved in it and immersed in it.
For sure. And some of the stories were intimate. As I say, I remember one night when I met this guy named Mike, smoking, and the sky was gonna rain. There was lightning kind of going off in the distant sky, and his wife had died just 3 months earlier. And he began to tell me about that. And he said, she got cancer 5 years ago, and we moved out of Michigan to Florida because she said, I want to go somewhere warm. And I said, whatever you want. And, now she's died and my kids and grandkids all want me to come back, but I don't want to go back there. I don't know. He just immediately started telling me, and I thought about, should I record him for the podcast? And somehow I did not want to turn that moment into a transactional one. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And so we just stayed there and chatted more about that. And I said, well, do you have friends? He said, no, I really don't. I mean, now that she's gone, I work and go home, but I don't care. I'm just going to tell him on this trip I don't want to go back to Michigan. And it was something about him just, I just didn't want to turn it into a transaction. So we walked over together and looked at the map. He was trying to make it to Savannah that night. We looked at how far it was, and Cheney came up, and all of us talked, and yeah.
Yeah, early in the piece, you wrote that for me, this trip is a therapy session with my country. So, in what way? How would you describe it as a therapy session on this trip?
We're at a point where I often feel discouraged, demoralized, uh, disturbed. When I was a kid, you used to think about who in history you'd most want to bring back. And for me, for some reason, it was Anne Frank. And I really wanted to wished I could bring her back to have a conversation with her about what her life was like. And I've often thought about why didn't more people leave when they could? And I'm not saying that we're on the point of that kind
Yeah.
of thing, but you do think about leaving. Should I leave? Should I stay? What is this country? And, I think that algorithms and social media can color your idea of what's out there. And I begin to think, gosh, is it me and my three friends that we feel this way? What's out there? Are people not going to be polite anymore? Are people not going to be kind anymore to one another? What am I going to find out there? It sounds stupid, but I think if you're isolated in your own little bubble and then you see the world mainly through what you see online, I wanted to go out in person and see that.
Yeah, unplugging from social media is the best medicine so many people can do. Because to your point, it silos you. You start to see only what you want to see, and then these algorithms and AI interfaces are learning from you and just pump you full of that stuff to the point where everything that's exclusive or excluded from that bubble is suddenly othered, and then you become more and more tribalized and more ossified in that belief. It's and now it's starting to get more populated with AI and AI bots that are just there to further solidify your own stance on something, and now you don't even know who you're talking with is real or not, which is all the more important to the reporting you did in this piece, to like see people eye to eye and meet them and shake their hand and actually have an interaction, and suddenly that algorithmic bubble will kind of burst a bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. Proximity doesn't fix the division, but it does lower the temperature enough to see that there's another person there that you can interact with. And I felt much more optimistic after, even halfway through this trip. I was saying to Cheney, oh gosh, I'm feeling better. It shows me that finding the center is not really, it's not a position as much as it is a practice of showing up, maybe asking better questions, maybe doing more active listening to people that you wouldn't normally necessarily interact with. And I sort of wanted to say to everybody, hey, sometime in the next month, go out and talk to somebody, walk up to somebody who you don't even know and say, hey, would you mind if I ask you something about your life, whatever, because I think that, I don't know, it might start to help. It helped me psychologically during that trip to realize that people are not as one dimensional as their yard signs, and there's a lot more nuances, and and a lot of us are, want many of the same things. We're just struggling to get there.
And one sentence I love was that I-95 is an artery of ambition, movement, and flight. And as someone who has spent thousands of miles on I-95, I can definitely relate to that. But in what way, like, how did that sentence come to you, that it is this artery of ambition, movement, and flight?
Well, movement and flight should be easily to understand. A lot of people were traveling for events, birth, death, illness, last time to see somebody, graduations at the time of year I was doing it. So there was that sense of going somewhere, plus a sense of possibility. We were often driving into late at night. We spent many nights sleeping in the back of Cheney's car at some rest stop, sometimes right in front of a sign which says no sleeping here allowed, just kind of to our own private smile. And, you know, you feel at night like I have a magical feeling driving at night. Like it's magic. Like you're in the dark and it's around you, but you know you could wake up and in the morning it's going to look entirely different. You're going to be somewhere new and incredible, and it's going to be exciting. So that idea of flight for me too. And ambition, it wasn't a very ambitious project when it was first built. There were lots of hopes and dreams for what this could do, what this highway could do by connecting us, by uniting us, by making us one and making us easily accessible to one another all along the eastern seaboard. And that's one reason I wanted that to be the vein of the story.
Well, and also a central thread of the story too is you spending time with your son Cheney, and having that bond with him. How did that come to pass, and what was that experience like for you to spend all these hours in the car on this project with your son?
Well, Cheney and I have done projects before. We did a project out of Starr County, Texas, that is a website, tracingmemory.com, and it involves Starr County has an exceptionally high rate of Alzheimer's, and we talked to the caretakers and doctors and nurses and put together, his great photographs and my writing and interviews, and so I like to work with him. And then as I put in the piece, he and Seyward Seyward. The beginning of the piece is much the same as when I sent it to her, but when she called me, she said, "I want more with you and Cheney." So I told her what was going on with Cheney and I, how this is the first trip that we had taken together since I found out that he had a secret 11-year marriage that he hadn't told me about. And she said, "Okay, we want this in the piece." And I said, "All right, well, I have to ask Cheney." And so, of course, I did. And he said, "Yeah, if you can write anything you want, as long as it's true," he said. And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to take that as an initial yes, but you'll look at the copy itself and make sure you feel okay about it." So we had already talked through the issues around him keeping that a secret, and some of that's in the piece itself. But this was, how it is. You're with somebody basically all day, every day, going from rest stop to rest stop, talking about who you've just spoken to together, kind of, collaborating. What did you think of that? That question felt awkward, whatever it might be, eating together, working out and showering at Planet Fitness together, sleeping in the back of his car together, all of that, and I mean, it was great. I mean, I think, I'm a pretty good traveler, and he is too, in terms of, whatever happens, it's going to be fine. Even if it's not exactly what you planned, we're going to work it out. It'll be cool, easygoing enough to make everything work.
Yeah, what would you? How would you characterize your relationship, sort of like pre and post this project?
I mean, we had a strong relationship pre this project too, but this was the first trip we took together since I found out about the secret marriage. And
Yeah.
so in that sense, as I say in the piece, we by this time we'd already talked it through, used the words, but we hadn't spent this time together just hanging out. And I don't know what you think, Brendan, but there's something magical and close about not even using words, but just, sharing, campfire coffee with somebody, or, waking up in the morning together, rubbing your eyes out, or just all of it, that nothing can replace for me in terms of real closeness.
Yeah, well, there's something to be said about you think that you're in the car all these hours together, that you would probably be talking all the time, but you were probably silent more than you were talking in a lot of ways. But even just being in and around each other, you can go 2 or 3 hours without talking, but still feel every bit as close to that person.
Absolutely. And we probably were talking more than that because we were stopping at all those rest stops.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, and he likes light. He's looking for morning light and evening light, and just after a rainfall light and that kind of thing. And sometimes the light was too bright for him and too wrong, so he would kick back and say, "All right, go do your thing, go." But then I would come back and say, "Oh, here, listen to this one. What do you think?" And sometimes I would come back, but I still have to do a few more, but I want you to hear this one. And it was good to bounce it off somebody. And as I say, I was trying to find the right way to ask somebody, "Where do you think our country's going?" but not force that question into our conversation. Be really open to letting them lead, because that was part of building trust, that I'm here, I'm ready to listen to you, I'm receptive, and I'm not just going after what I want out of this, which is, are we as divided as they say we are? Really? What do you think? But more like, oh, a graduation. That's cool. Who is that? And that kind of thing.
Yeah. How do you achieve that? And this, I believe, a term that Isabel Wilkerson uses, an accelerated intimacy, in these interactions.
And that's definitely what this was, accelerated intimacy. And sometimes it really worked. And I, I think, you hit on the idea that, and a lot has been talked about loneliness and people being alone. And often it was travelers traveling alone who had paused to sip a cup of coffee or smoke a cigarette or just were sitting there that I ended up approaching and having the longest conversations with, the deepest conversations. But I think that showing them that you're actively listening, that you're not judging, and that you really are interested is the best way. And all those things were absolutely true with me. I now truly was interested, and you're interested in wherever they want to lead, and you're not going to force the conversation. So that for me was a little bit of the struggle. If I only have 5 minutes with you, Brandon, and I want to get to where do you think our country's going, how do you feel about that, but that's not where we're going in those 5 minutes, then I have to be okay with that somehow. You know what I mean? And that, so it's an interesting lesson for me too to be working on it during that time.
So in interviewing 250 people, that's so much. And this piece is 7,000-8,000 words. Naturally, you can't include everybody.
No.
So how do you audition the tape and the interviewing you do and fit them into the piece, and then let other ones fall by the wayside and not weigh down the narrative and the story you're looking to tell?
Well, Seyward helped with that. I will say that there are some people I didn't get in, even to the draft I gave her, that I'm sorry I didn't. I mean, there were just too many people. There are some people who I think, okay, I cover that viewpoint through this person or that person. But there were some people that I talked to who stick with me right now because I didn't get them in. So I don't think I want to write a book on this, by the way, but I mean, there's definitely enough people, with enough stories to tell, from the guy who was supervising 120 migrant workers picking blueberries as they headed to New Jersey. And we talked a lot about that whole blueberry farming and his own life when he was born in the Bronx and how he started. His first job was 14 herding cattle for his uncle. Anyway, in Puerto Rico, I mean, there was a mother traveling with her two daughters, and now the two daughters are adults, so they're driving. But they recounted when they were children, and she was driving one time on the I-95 long trip and got so mad at them that she pulled over and just yelled at them. And she said, it's much better now that they're driving. I mean, there was a man who was 89 years old in Maine. I mean, so many people come to me right now as I think about it who you could put into the story for sure.
And you brought up Seyward. What were those conversations like as you were drafting this piece and getting it, bringing it to fruition?
I mean, I'm very grateful to her. She's a great editor, and it was wonderful. And as I say, she was the first one who pushed me to put more of Cheney and me on the page. And this, is not something I've often done as a journalist. I mean, my early training was that I'm the pipe through which the story travels. I'm clear, I'm invisible. You're the story, and your words are going to be projected out. And her idea was, yeah, okay, you're still the pipe, but the pipe is also part of the story. It shapes the flow, and so it really. And in all honesty, if we're going to get to a greater truth, you can't just be a neutral instrument. Here you are in the car together going rest stop to rest stop. I need more of that. So I felt in some ways that made the story more accountable and deeper. And as Cheney was willing, it worked out.
Yeah, it's always great getting the challenges and maybe pardon the pun, but like roadblocks along the way and drafting a piece. So what were some of those challenges that presented themselves to you as you were drafting this?
I think the biggest one was I did have too many recordings of people, and at some point I felt, am I just like a what do they call those rods when you try to find water? Am I just
divining rod? Yeah.
Yes. Am I just picking out a recording? I mean, should I re-listen to all of these recordings that I have and go, oh, I just can't do it. No, and so, that was the biggest stumbling block, I think, is, am I getting everybody in? The ending was very difficult. Drawing conclusions about Cheney was not difficult, but drawing conclusions about the country, everything is so much in motion. And so the ending, I would be interested to know what Seyward said, but I think we spent a lot of time thinking about that ending, working on that ending, and you know, and that was a challenge, I would say. And close to the ending too, the houseless community was moving for me to write about it. And I mean, I have more material there about them, but that was interesting.
Mm. How do you think about endings, and when do they pop into your head, and how do you, like, to what extent are you really ruminating over, bringing a piece to a satisfying conclusion and landing?
Well, I mean, I think beginnings and endings are probably the two most important things, right? Do you think so?
Yeah, well, certainly, but the middle can get lost in that, and where the
Yeah.
middle can sag. So like pacing is important, but yeah, it's like you want that beginning to hook you to keep you going, and you want that ending to almost bring you back to the start because you want to read it again. But the
Right.
middle can't suffer. Sometimes a lot of people so it ends up to being this horseshoe. Put so much attention on the beginning and the end, and that middle sags. So, but yeah,
Yes.
but to your point, they are so crucial. Yeah, they need to rhyme sometimes.
Yes, but you're absolutely right about the middle. And I mean, in the novels I've done, I find that second third of the novel is the hardest in many ways. I don't know if you find this, but it's a slog. And I
Yeah.
often give myself little encouragements, like I'll write down, okay, you wrote 12 pages today. And I'll just keep a calendar so that I can look back on it and see that I actually accomplished something during that month. You do want the reader to feel satisfied with the ending. And you do want to feel that you answered the questions you set out to answer in a way that maintains what you're hoping is a lyrical tone of the piece as a whole, and is true and is honest, but maybe not like with a great big period, because that's not really how life is. I don't know if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Oh, for sure. And you're bringing up the slog of the middle, the messy middles. That can be just so. It's so hard because you're too far away from shore to turn back, but you're so far away from the end that it's overwhelming. In the face of that, you've approached the middles many times in your career. Like you already mentioned one tactic of just like reminding yourself how far you've come, but like how do you just keep pushing and keep that momentum going through that really messy middle?
Well, and I've taught novel writing quite a bit, and I really urge people, and I'm sure it's true on all nonfiction projects too, this has to be meaningful to you. It has to be a story that won't leave you alone, a story that you're willing to rearrange your calendar for, that you the curiosity about the story is so compelling to you that you cannot imagine not pursuing it, because that deep commitment. And you have that quote of the guy who says, some point somebody else has to care about this story, and I agree with that. And in every, I've often said when a novel's about to be published, I remember saying to my husband at one point, is anyone really gonna give a shit about this story? And he said to me, you say that every time. So I think that at some point we all probably wonder, like, are we so excited about this, and is anybody else going to be as excited as we are? But I do think that internal drive, the way that story speaks to us, the things that it's showing us about ourselves or our lives, or that the ways it's deepening and broadening us, are what keep us writing, and they are so important for that second third.
Yeah, I loved hearing you say like, something to rearrange your calendar for, and that's what it takes, especially after that honeymoon period where every idea seems great, and then you start running out. The tank gets low, and you're like, oh man, and it's like the honeymoon's over. But how do you persevere in the face of that? It's the it's a question we all reach, and I think once you hit that point, and if you can push through it, it's like okay, that's what delineates kind of maybe the wannabes from the people who can finish things. Because how many unfinished things are just languishing on the vine, right?
Yeah, I mean, it really, as I say, I think it has to be very important to you, and that meaningfulness really has to just be deep in yourselves. And when I think about this, I mean, there's been times with my novel when, one person has come up to me and said, oh my God, I read this and this made me feel this way. I didn't know anybody else thought whatever. And for me, like, that's all right. So that's good. That's what I was hoping for, one connection with one person in this kind of way is fabulous. Somebody else who felt kind of like I did, or like the character I was depicting did, and so I do think we have to be driven forward by that, and then we have to keep going deeper and deeper in our own work. I think it's especially true with books and novels. Probably not nonfiction books, because you submit a proposal and you get that, but a novel, you're just out there writing. Nobody's bought the damn thing, and you're going to spend 3 years trying to make it work. And if it gets published, and of course you want that, that's going to be the icing on the cupcake, but there's still going to be the cupcake there regardless.
Yeah. And your experience of coaching people along, teaching people how to write novels and fiction, what are some common concerns and worries that you stumble across from aspiring writers?
Well, when I'm teaching, my main goal is to try to understand what they want to do and what's compelling them. And so when they give me their manuscript, and I usually have a draft of it done, because there are 40 million ways to write a novel, and I don't want to just suggest a different way to write a novel. I want to help them write it the way they want to write it. Right? Yeah, and so that's my goal. And I think that we're in the world that we're in now. You really do have to think, is the agent and the editor and then the reader, each of these, going to read beyond page 1? Great, they are. You've got them involved. Okay, but now are they going to read beyond page 2? And what about page 3? Yeah. And unfortunately, you really have to, you can't. And when pacing, you mentioned pacing, and I think that's such a great question. Voice can be strong. You need to think about so many elements as a writer that you don't think about if you're just a reader. I think in the same way. Once you think that, when I'm editing a novel, I pull it apart and I read just the sections that deal with this particular character to see how they're flowing. I pull out just those sections, or I read just the beginnings and the endings of chapters, just the last paragraph and the first one or the next one. I try to pull it apart in different ways to look at it in different ways. And when I'm working with somebody, it depends where the issues arise and what they're trying to do. But I think when they struggle most is when they have veered away from what their vision is. They kind of got pulled off that, and I want to bring them back to whatever they really wanted to do, the thing that got them excited and enthused in the first place.
Yeah, getting veered off that track, it's all the more, you probably see it all the more these days because it's so much easier to compare ourselves to others and other people's practice or processes, and then other people's successes or perceived successes, and here we are struggling in the mud, flopping around, trying to get anything accomplished. And so, I'd extend that to you, Masha. Just like, how do you, persevere in the face of the comparison traps and what you're seeing online versus maybe how you feel while you're in the throes of a draft that's just not working for you in the moment?
One thing I tell myself and remind myself is I've never known a single good writer who hasn't felt at times inadequate or insecure. So I think maybe that's something, when we're really honest, I think it's maybe something we all share, or maybe not one or two of us, but the vast majority of us, we all have moments when we think, first of all, is anybody else going to care about this? And secondly, ugh, this draft looks just horrible. I don't want to read it. Ugh, and thirdly, it's the pacing has fallen so flat here. I'm so bored. What am I going to do? I think this is just part of the process. And that's why I think you have to really care about what you're doing. It's a long work. And this, Brendan, long work. It's a long distance run. You have to be in it for the long haul.
Oh, for sure. Well, and to your point too about, being so bored with your own work, it's like, is it poorly paced, or have I just read it 20 times and I'm just bored by it? And it's like, you can't look at it with the fresh eyes anymore. So you can't really be a good judge, but so that brings in, all right, maybe you need fresh eyes. Who are the trusted people that you go to? So you'd be like, all right, is this boring, or am I just bored with it because I've spent so much time with it?
Yeah, I have different people for different projects because I think that maybe each work has its own, ideal readers, people. But I do absolutely, I'm very grateful for those early readers because they're reading a so at least a part of, I'm not saying you don't have a great idea and you probably have a wonderful beginning since you've spent like, ages working on those first 12 pages. But after that, who knows? And so I definitely go to workshop different parts of this with different readers and return the favor for them. But as I say, I also, on a long form piece, I try to break it up so I can look at it in different ways. Sometimes I just look at the dialogue, nothing else, just the dialogue. Then maybe I'll just look at and then maybe I'll plot how each character changes from the beginning of the end of the just that one individual character. So it's once you have a whole, breaking it into pieces for me helps me see it new as well. But nothing can take the place of good readers. And I think you don't always, I share it with I share my early work with a number of readers if they'll take it and do the same for them, because I feel that, if you come back to me, Brendan, and say, like, I did not believe this character at all, and I think you should make him a hairy gorilla. What I may hear from that is, I'm not going to make him a hairy gorilla, but he didn't work for you. So something's wrong there. So if I'm not going to go with your solution, I at least see that you're identifying a problem. And if the next reader says the same thing, like, that guy, what the heck, then I really know I've got a problem. And it brings it to light for me,
A moment ago too, you brought up, sometime an element of a story that can pull us along is maybe voice or style. And I'm reading Sacha Bonet's memoir, The Water Bearers, right now. It's coming out soon, or it might be out now. But very voice-driven and a very engaging voice. And I bring that up just to get your sense of voice and style and maybe some of your influences and of how you cultivated your voice, through all the things that inspired you.
I'm gonna have to look for Sacha Bonet's book. I hope it's out. I'll take a look for that for sure. I read a lot. You probably do too, and I read widely. And when I'm writing a novel, I often read poetry. I don't know what you feel about this. I don't think voice can necessarily be forced.
Right. Yeah.
I
think it's the, to your point of reading widely, it's the metabolism of those influences, and then just putting a lot into practice, and then eventually, like a Polaroid picture, it just kind of develops, and but you don't become just one kind of voice. It's always changing, as you're taking in more voices, contemporary voices, old voices, experimenting, just fucking around in your journal or with a draft, seeing where it takes you, and you're like, oh, that sounds pretty cool, like something maybe I haven't quite heard before, just like a little spin on an influence, and then it's like, oh, that feels like me now.
Absolutely. And also, I think the material itself dictates it to a degree as well. If you're writing about, the front runner, if you're writing about a young athlete, or if you're writing about, an 89-year-old woman, or if you're writing about, a young boy living in the Bronx. So, some of this is by your characters, either fictional or non-fictional, that you want to reflect some of their reality.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a great point you bring up, because maybe if you're someone who has a comedic sensibility, not every story will fit that tone. Like, you need to be like, oh, what is this story asking of me? All right, I'm gonna go try on. I'm gonna wear this costume for this particular thing, and so that's a really good point. Like, you can't just be like, here's my style, and I don't care if I'm writing about this funeral. Like, here I come in my style.
And it can work. I'm not saying that, but I do think, I don't know that I have one voice as much as, probably. I don't know about you. I've written my whole life. As a kid, I wrote.
Yeah, me too. A lot.
Yeah, a lot of us are in that same boat. I did a family newspaper for my mom and dad and brother when I was like 10, online school paper. I don't know what the news was in our house. Probably not much, but whatever. I always knew that I needed to write. I always knew that was just, that was it. And so, whatever voice has emerged through that, you're right. Practice is part of it.
Yeah, it is one of those things that's always evolving, and sometimes you're always afraid maybe to look back at stuff you've written in the past because you might be a little embarrassed. But sometimes there's real firecracker quality to that early stuff before you knew too much. You're like, wow, that actually sounds pretty good despite, having decades more experience. You're like, wow, that little baby writer there had a little something to him or her.
Yeah, for sure. But I have to tell you, I'm a relentless editor. I edit and edit. And when I've had to do readings out of my novels after they're published, I usually edit the page that I'm going to read. So the copy I'm reading from has my editings right on the printed copy. And that's not going to be in the book they buy. But I still, for my reading, I've changed this word. I don't like that anymore, whatever it is, So that's not a great quality, but it's definitely my part of my style.
And like towards the end of your Atavist piece, I love this one sentence of like, because belonging is a practice, a choice remade again and again, even as trust phrase and the horizon blurs. And I just love the sense there of belonging as a practice, and like it's work to make these connections. And is that just something that really emerged all the more true to you, just with all these interactions, hundreds of interactions up and down I-95?
100%. I think, uh, I think in my experience of covering various stories, I began to feel that leaders like to create an us and a them because it makes it easier for them to control people's actions and perceptions. So there's us and we're all good, and then there's them, they're not, and we're kind of evenly divided. And it's based on who knows what, where you live, what your gender is, what your political party is, what your sexual preferences are. I have no idea what. But I've come to feel that's really not true. That's way not nuanced enough. And really, there's a whole bunch of us, and then there's a few of them. but they're not broken down by that. And so we have to find a way to not be afraid of each other just based on superficial things that really don't mean that much. And so that was the whole idea. And I think it's not a new lesson, but it's an ongoing lesson, even at a time like this when algorithms and the media present us as so divided. And, either you think this and you're bad, and I think this and I'm good. It's much more nuanced than that and much more complex. And we can either sit in our house and say, I'm scared of everybody and I don't know who they are anymore, or we can step out of it and really try to listen to somebody else and that idea of belonging, finding that we do belong, that we actually do belong.
Oh yeah, that's really wonderfully put. And when it comes to, let's say, the writing and advice that maybe you give, or advice you've gleaned through experience or a cherished mentor, what is some writing advice that you find very valuable that maybe you lean on, hard won, or maybe something you've taken on from a mentor of yours?
The very first novel that I had published, my first editor, I said to him, what do all first-time novelists like me get wrong? And he said, you don't trust your readers enough. I loved that. And that piece of advice I do carry. So I really try not to over-explain, and I do try to trust my readers to get it and to go along with me on a journey. So I think that's the one that stayed with me.
Well, Masha, I love bringing these conversations down for a landing by asking the guest for a recommendation of some kind, just something fun that you're enjoying that you might want to share with the listeners.
Oh, fun. I'm I'm researching the next project, so I'm kind of researching the first Red Scare of 1917. So I don't know if this is fun, but I've been watching old documentaries about the IWW, the Union, and their stories, and what happened in Butte, Montana, with was it named Freddie Little, an injury of one. That's not exactly fun in the sense of laughter or a comedy show, but it's been interesting and timely for now. And I guess other than that, I would just say Pilates. Go out and exercise, do something good.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Masha, this was such a wonderful conversation about this incredible piece you did for the Atavist. So I just thank you for the work, and thanks for coming on the show to talk shop.
Oh, thank you for having me. You do such a great job, and I'm thrilled to have been one of your people.
Yes. Awesome. Thanks to Masha, Seyward, and you. Go to magazine.atavist.com to read Masha's story, and be sure you're newslettered up. with my Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter and Pitch Club. Welcome to pitchclub.substack.com. The Rager and Pitch Club went out a couple days ago, October 1st. First of the month, no spam, can't beat them. Not a terribly long parting shot, but I figured I'd riff on the Florence Festival of Books, which was a fun time. I was tabling the front runner. I was right there at the opening gate. Me and Ruby, side by side, shooting the shit. I'd say most of the authors at this event were self-published. Not all, but a good chunk. So there was a little crackle in the air when a few authors approached me and asked me if I was self-published. And I said no, it was an imprint of HarperCollins, to which the side eye and the eyebrows raise, and they kind of look at you in disbelief. And the tone they take, it really stinks of their years of frustration, of trying to find an agent and not, of trying to land a Big Five deal and not. And I understand deeply that frustration. I do. I was approached by a guy whose wife was tabling her self-pub titles around the corner. And he went down the line of questioning with me, for one, telling me what I should write next, which is always fun when people tell you what some really obscure esoteric topic that you should take up next. And it was like, do you have an agent? Did you self-publish? I was like, yes, and then no. There was a kind of a lot of judgment in the air, kind of a pissing contest kind of thing happening. And I don't judge or begrudge the indie publishing scene. It's pretty punk rock when you really boil it down. But to do it well takes significant personal investment. And I've seen any number of self-published things come my way, and there are typos all over the place. The bindings are cheap. Things feel unfinished. They feel hasty. I imagine there were some great indie authors, on site. I mean, they must have been. And some can lock into an audience and make a living, be fulfilled and not be beholden to gatekeepers. That's the appeal. So I was selling books for $15 a piece. As many of you know, the front runner retails for $32.99. I bought them at $16.50. So I sold 12 books, so there was no way I was selling anything at full price. So I figured it was best to just take a loss than to sell 0 copies. I forgot what it was like to sell books, the whole spiel. I did this a lot with 6 Weeks in Saratoga, but it was odd doing it for the front runner. I hadn't expected to do that, but it was fine. You get used to it. And then Ruby and we had a fruitful discussion, and we were the sort of the keynote conversation, the headlining conversation in Q&A, and we were just sitting on the edge of the stage or so. A few people stuck around. There was probably a dozen people. Ruby talked about radical incrementalism as it pertained to a literary career and geology, and I loved that notion of the small done repeatedly over geologic time leads to something seismic. There's a lot of wisdom there, packed into radical incrementalism. I had fun. I'd do it again. It's all about community. It's all about this, man. Anyway, stay wild, CNFers. And if you can't do, interview. See ya in Idaho. See ya.